Good evening and welcome to Berkshire Lodge of Enlightenment Live. My name is John McGregor. I am a member of the Berkshire Learning and Development Committee, and I am responsible for the technical side of things behind the scenes this evening. Before we start, I have some housekeeping announcements. Firstly, if you have IT issues, then we suggest logging off and then log back on, as this usually works. Being a webinar, you will not be visible via your camera and you will be muted. On your webinar window, there is a chat function which you can use to highlight any technical problems, or you can send messages to other attendees. Please do not post questions intended for the panelists on the chat function. We are keen for participants to ask questions at any point in the webinar. There is a Q&A function in your webinar window. Please use the Q&A function to ask panelists questions as we proceed through the webinar. The Q&A session will be held at the end. If we are unable to answer all questions during the webinar, then we will answer these offline and share the whole set of question and answers with attendees. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to attendees in the next few days. This webinar is a safe space for all attendees. We maintain a judgment-free space where we commit to consistently provide each other with a supportive and respectful environment. We therefore encourage conversation and debate between members, but expect everyone concerned to be courteous, tolerant, and respectful. During the webinar, we will bring up attendee poll questions which you can answer anonymously, and we ask that you participate in the polls as it will provide useful information for the presenters. The duration of this webinar will be around 40 to 45 minutes. I now hand you over to Ian Clark as your host for this evening.
Good evening, brethren, and on behalf of the Berkshire Lodge of Enlightenment, let me welcome you to this, the first edition of our bi-monthly online magazine, Enlightenment Live. My name is Ian Clark and I'm the current master of the Lodge, which was set up in 2017 to serve you, Berkshire Freemasons, by stimulating and we hope satisfying your curiosity about Freemasonry. Let's just have a first quick poll to see how many of you have had contact with the Lodge before, or is this your first contact? Perhaps you could just answer that yes or no. Yes, if you've been to one of our meetings before. No, if this is your first. And we will get the results momentarily. Okay, that's great. So not far from a half and half split. 55% have been to our physical meetings. Thank you for coming to the online event. And I'm pleased to welcome 45% of us, 22 attendees as a first visit. At our physical lodge meetings, as you might expect, we deal with many Masonic topics. Not so much those topics relating to how we do things, but rather why, on why we are the way we are, and why we do things that we do. And this involves looking at our beliefs and values, our history and organization, and the symbolism and meaning embedded in our ritual and ceremonies. First slide, please. In this way, we hope to help you make a daily advancement in Masonic knowledge that will enrich your experience of being a Freemason. We normally meet 4 times a year, twice in Sindresham, but equally importantly, twice in other centres around the province. We move around. Our meetings are mostly open to all brethren, even the newest entered apprentice, and members of the lodges in the centre being visited are especially welcome to attend and join in. The meetings are real lodge meetings, but are conducted with a lightness of touch and good humour, which reflects the importance we place on setting the right, relaxed tone for learning. We create an environment for discussion and debate in which there are no silly or foolish questions, and in which everyone is treated with respect. The same principle applies in these Enlightenment live sessions. There are no stupid questions. Each meeting of the Lodge includes a presentation or a short demonstration and a discussion of a Masonic topic or topics. And because we don't work formal degrees, we usually have plenty of time for questions and discussions, which continue at the festive board. I say we don't work formal degrees, but for example, we have demonstrated a shortened version of the initiation ceremony, accompanied by a running commentary explaining what's going on. And that's a good example of explaining why we do the things that we do. And it adds meaning to the ceremony and enhances understandings. We're now adding this online presence to extend our program and to make it easier to reach a wider audience. I'm sure that even when we get back to physical meetings, the convenience and ease with which we can get together as we are this evening will mean that we'll continue to offer Enlightenment Live, evolving and improving it as we go. And in fact, we have another 2 editions already on the stocks. We'll be talking about that later. In each edition, we'll have 3 or 4 short items, which will cover a range of different topics presented by different speakers. We aim to finish in about 40 to 45 minutes and leave some time for questions and discussion. Some items will be topical, and others will be part of a series of similar items. And you'll see this evening an example of 4 such items. We'll start with an introduction to a part of Solomon that you may not have seen. And in so doing, we'll also be introducing the idea of a conversation between a new member and a more experienced Mason. We'll see this double header developed in later editions, and you'll be able to influence the topics and questions we deal with in those items. Our second item this evening will kick off a series we're calling The History of Berkshire Freemasonry in 42 Objects. If you heard the excellent Radio 4 series, A History of the World in 100 Objects, you'll get the idea. In that series, Neil McGregor, who was then the director of the British Museum, spun a story around a gem of the collection. We've taken a bit of a liberty and extended the definition of objects to include our lodges, Masonic centres, and even interesting Berkshire Freemasons. Our third item this evening is the first in the series entitled In the Chair, and we're honoured to have the Right Worshipful Provincial Grand Master with us, and he'll be answering questions on why he believes learning is an important part, perhaps an essential core of our Masonic life and journey. And after that, we'll introduce the Master's Conundrum, when the Master will set a puzzle, which with luck, when correctly solved, will lead to a prize. And in this case, the winner, drawn at random from the correct answers, will receive a prize of a book or books of his choice on a Masonic subject up to a value of £25. And we'll conclude with a question and answer session that will give you the opportunity of putting questions about any of the topics we've covered. Use the question and answer facility at the bottom of your screen. Okay, more on all that later, but now on with the first item, and I'll hand over to Ken Wooten, who will tell us about 2 characters to be found in that wonderful and ever-expanding repository of Masonic knowledge, Solomon. Over to you, Ken.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. Good evening, brethren. I'm Ken Wooten. I've been involved with Solomon really from its outset. And we found that when trying to discuss and resolve many aspects of Masonic ritual or symbolism, there's rarely a cold black or a pure snow white. There's usually just a palette of shades of grey, and probably far more than 50 shades of grey. In fact, Solomon often presents 2 or more contrasting takes on the same subject and states very clearly that nothing on the platform is the accepted view of UGLE. Some of the papers on Solomon, which are of the sort of me write, you read form, can be wordy and difficult to take in or understand, because really they only offer the author's point of view. However, there's one set of documents on Solomon that presents a very different perspective. Let me introduce you to Fred and Charlie, characters drawn from the imagination of Worshipful Brother Michael Lee. Fred is around 60 and has been a Freemason for more than 20 years. After taking 12 years to reach the chair, his pride in good ceremonial made him a perfect fit for the Lodge Director of Ceremonies. Provincial rank soon followed, and I'm sure we all know a Fred or someone very much like him amongst our Masonic acquaintances. Over his Masonic career, Fred became increasingly enthusiastic about the merits of Freemasonry and had been heard to say that in our secular age, if Masonry hadn't existed, it would need to be invented. And this enthusiasm led to his early election as preceptor of the Lodge of Instruction. And with his family having flown the nest, he found the time and inclination to encourage his lodge's younger members and would regularly take one or two to visit nearby lodges and use the journey home to explain and discuss the variations they'd seen, thereby showing the benefits of visiting. Charlie is in his mid-30s. He's a young man, recently married with a new son. He's very much the modern man, wanting to share his time and energy with his partner and child. Spare time for Charlie is a precious commodity. However, recognizing the merits of some occasional all-male company on a civilized boys' night out, he was persuaded to join Freemasonry. Disillusionment soon set in. The time spent out of the temple, the arcane language of the ritual, the constant references to a supreme being all sowed the first seeds of doubt. Coming from a modern background, the hierarchy, seniority, and regular salutations bestowed on some members was completely out of kilter with Charlie's contemporary lifestyle. The last straw was the remoteness of the lodge's senior members, some of whom never seemed able to remember his name. Again, I'm sure we can all recognize a brother similar to Charlie. Increasingly, Charlie began to miss meetings and drift away, but luckily, having been persuaded to attend a Lodge of Instruction, he became infected by Fred's enthusiasm and inspired by his knowledge. For Charlie, at long last, he began to understand what speculative Freemasonry was really about, and he wanted to be part of it. Now, in Masonic brotherhoods, sharp opposites aren't appropriate, so a complementary pair had to be envisaged. What better way than to make the protagonists two Masons with which any Lodge of Instruction could identify? Enter stage left a past master, who doesn't know it all, but knows where to find it, and enter stage right, an enthusiastic younger Mason who has an inquiring mind and a thirst for knowledge. So there we have our two protagonists. Stage left, an enthusiastic younger Mason who has an inquiring mind and a thirst for knowledge, and stage right, a past master who doesn't know it all, but knows where to find it. So let's have a look at one of the Fred and Charlie papers, where they tangle with the difficult question, what is Freemasonry? In this paper, Fred and Charlie discuss the true meaning of Freemasonry in the context of the current coronavirus pandemic. How up to the minute can you get? It all starts with a phone call from Charlie to Fred, who, along with his wife, has been self-isolating. Charlie recognized the pandemic was a golden opportunity for Masons to step up to the plate and demonstrate what brotherhood was really all about. And after an offer to do some shopping had been accepted, the call turns to more gossipy matter. And Charlie wonders if Freemasonry can survive the coronavirus. Fred assures him that Freemasonry has survived much worse and tended to grow more vigorously after each such upheaval. Charlie wonders why. Fred explains that at one level, Freemasonry offers great friendship out of the lodge and good-humoured conviviality within it. For many, it provides a relaxing company after the stresses of the working week. There's also a comforting sense of well-being, a feeling of easy acceptance for simply being who we are, rich or poor, young or old. Freemasonry starts and ends with the individual brother. The lodge is merely his location. Freemasonry offers him a worldwide system of morality with principles that are clear and unwavering, and allied with charity towards others and the courage to remain true to those principles. The paper continues with a discussion about charity and other fraternal organisations. And then Charlie states that some of the younger Masons simply look forward to dressing up in a white shirt, dark suit for a monthly dinner, which is a nice blend of formality and a cheerful banter. It makes a pleasant change from a hurried meal in casual clothes. Younger Masons tend to like that bit of formality and ceremonial. It makes us who we are. Fred retorts that it's also the case that our 300 years of history probably makes Masons who we really are. In Freemasonry, it is always people that matter most. That's the belief that helps Freemasons Fred and Charlie is what is Freemasonry? A great introduction to Fred and Charlie. It can be found on Solomon simply by searching Fred and Charlie, which will also list the other Fred and Charlie papers. All of them are written in an easy, humorous style by Worshipful Brother Michael Lee. They cover a whole range of topics, including charity, equality, the Royal Arch, and even the future of Freemasonry. They can all be downloaded and read at your leisure. A link to these papers is now being distributed through the chat and will be included in the follow-up paper. And if you like the idea of a discussion rather than a diatribe, then you'll be pleased to hear that a feature called Talks with an Elder Brother will be coming to Enlightenment Live very soon. A wide range of topics will be covered, and your ideas for future discussion are welcome. Thank you for listening. I hope Fred and Charlie might help you make your daily advancement. Back to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Brethren, if you haven't already, I hope that taste of Fred and Charlie will persuade you to log in to Solomon and explore the great range of supporting material that's being accumulated there. If you've got any questions about Ken's session, please use the question and answer facility, and we'll get to those questions at the end of this evening. We're going to, as Ken said, we're going to continue the theme of those conversations between a newer member and a more experienced brother in our next edition on the 5th of July. Now, though, we'll move on to our next item for this evening, and this is the first in the series entitled A History of Berkshire Freemasonry in 42 Objects. We decided that 100 objects might be a bit of a stretch, so we settled on 42 in a nod to a non-Masonic literary allusion. The series was inspired by the knowledge that we have many gems in the province which have special historical connections and interests, many of which are usually hidden or restricted by their location. Some are purely Masonic, and others enable us to place Masonic objects and practices in the social and geopolitical context of the times in which they were made or originated. This evening, Steve Ricks will kick off the series by considering an object which is connected in a very special Masonic way to a host of the most interesting of our brethren in the province. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Ian. Good evening, brethren. Many of you would be aware, I'm sure, that there is a long history of Freemasonry between Berkshire and Buckinghamshire, going right back to the early 19th century. The first provincial Grand Master for Berkshire was Right Worshipful Brother Colonel John Deacon in 1773, followed by Right Worshipful Brothers Arthur Stanhope, Sir John Throgmorton and John Ramsbottom. In 1847, the two provinces joined to become the province of Berks and Bucks, and this situation endured until they separated for the last time in 1890. So, in 1890, His Royal Highness Prince Albert, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, was the first of the new Berkshire Provincial Grand Masters. He was installed by his father, the Grand Master, Most Worshipful Brother His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, at Reading Town Hall on the 15th of December, 1890, in what is still probably the largest Masonic gathering in Berkshire, with over 800 brethren present. The pedestal that was used was this magnificent piece of furniture, which comes from the Windsor Masonic Temple, and was gifted to the Etonian Lodge of St John, number 209, by its master and wardens in 1827. The pedestal was transported to Reading for the installation ceremony, presumably by horse and cart, and has been used for the installation of every provincial Grand Master of Berkshire ever since, forming a unique link between His Royal Highness Prince Albert in 1890 right up to Right Worshipful Brother Anthony today. And if you look at the front face of the pedestal, it's an all-seeing eye, surrounded by a glory. And below this is the plaque illustrated here. The plaque says this pedestal was presented to the Etonian Lodge number 359, because this was before the renumbering, held at the Swan Hotel, Windsor, in the county of Berks on the 27th day of December in the year of Masonry 5827 by, and it then lists the Master and Wardens. For any of you who have yet to have had your Grand Lodge certificate presented to you, this date will seem strange, but will soon become apparent. Sadly, Prince Albert only held the office of Provincial Grand Master for 1 year, as he died after a short illness. And he was not replaced immediately, and the Deputy Provincial Grand Master, Worshipful Brother John Morland, took charge for the next 7 years. So it was 7 years later when the next Provincial Grand Master was appointed in 1898. And this was Right Worshipful Brother, Right Honourable Lord Wantage, better remembered these days as Colonel Lloyd Lindsay, who gave his name to Lloyd Lindsay Lodge, number 3058, which of course is based at Wantage. Lord Wantage took his obligation on the Windsor pedestal at his installation again at Reading Town Hall. He also had a short tenure, as he died less than 3 years later in 1901, and once again the province was under the control of the Deputy Provincial Grand Master, Worshipful Brother John Morland, for the next 3 years. So since Berkshire and Buckinghamshire had gone their separate ways, John Morland had actually been at the helm for the majority of this 14 years without actually being invested as the Provincial Grand Master. Next slide, please. So it was no doubt just reward when he was appointed Provincial Grand Master in 1903. He was a member of Abbey Lodge, number 945, which still meets in Abingdon, and took his obligation on the Windsor pedestal, again at Reading Town Hall. Served the province well for the next 20 years. And of course, Moorland Lodge, number 3066, carries his name. Next was Right Worshipful Brother, His Royal Highness Prince Arthur of Connaught. He was installed at Reading Town Hall on the Windsor pedestal in 1924. A member of Wellesley Lodge, number 1899, he served the office for the next 14 years, but sadly died in office. His name, of course, still lives on in the Prince Arthur of Connaught Lodge, number 5261, which meets at Sindlesham. Right Worshipful Brother, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Nichol, was the first Provincial Grand Master not to be installed at Reading Town Hall, taking his obligation on the Windsor pedestal at Reading University Hall in 1940. A founder of Loddon Lodge, number 3427, he served the province as Provincial Grand Master for 10 years, and sadly became the fourth of 5 Provincial Grand Masters in succession to die in office. His name lives on in the Charles Nichol Lodge, number 7318, meeting at Sindlesham. Additionally, and one for the future, Right Worshipful Brother Charles Nichol commissioned an 18-carat gold collar jewel to be struck in 1943 by George Unite in Birmingham, which has recently been rediscovered in the West Country by our current Provincial Grand Master. Right Worshipful Brother Anthony intends to wear this jewel to provincial events, and it will be passed on to his successor, so will form another link between Provincial Grand Masters going forward. Right Worshipful Brother Harold Lake succeeded Right Worshipful Brother Charles Nichol, taking his obligation on the Windsor pedestal at Reading University Hall in 1950. A member of Pangbourne Lodge, he served the province for 10 years before stepping down, only to die later in the same year. Right Worshipful Brother Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ingham Clark succeeded Right Worshipful Brother Lake and took his obligation on the pedestal at Reading University Hall in 1960. He was a member of St Hilda Lodge, number 1887, and a founder of Portcullis Lodge, number 6672, both still meeting at Wallingford. He served the province for the next 7 years before retiring due to ill health in 1967. His name, of course, still lives on in the Ingham Clark Lodge, number 8164, which he had the honour of consecrating and which still meets also at Wallingford. He was succeeded in 1967 by Right Worshipful Brother Brigadier Edwin Flavell, who was installed at Reading University Hall. A member of Cookham Manor Lodge, number 3684, he was to carry on the work begun by his predecessor to establish a new centre for Berkshire Freemasonry. Sindlesham was purchased and Provincial Grand Lodge was held there for the first time in 1969. Right Worshipful Brother Edwin Flavell became the longest serving Provincial Grand Master of the province, serving for 25 years. And of course, his name lives on in the Edwin Flavell Lodge, number 8503, meeting at Sindlesham, where the Flavell Suite is also named after him. He was succeeded in 1985 by Right Worshipful Brother John Wilder, known as Tim. He became the first Provincial Grand Master to be installed at Sindlesham, which of course was also the first time that the Windsor pedestal had been to Sindlesham as well. He was initiated into Portcullis Lodge at Wallingford, becoming the second member of that lodge to reach the office of Provincial Grand Master. He gives his name to Berkshire's only daylight lodge, Wilder Lodge, number 9471. So we're now working up towards more modern times. Right Worshipful Brother Digby Woods succeeded Right Worshipful Brother Tim Wilder in 1994, installed at Sindlesham and taking his obligation on the Windsor pedestal. Right Worshipful Brother Digby was initiated into Aldworth Lodge, number 5191, and is of course still an active member of the province. His legacy still lives on today in the Learning and Development Committee, then called the Training Committee, which he founded, and which of course was the foundation for this lodge, the Berkshire Lodge of Enlightenment. Right Worshipful Brother Digby was succeeded by Right Worshipful Brother John Hooton, known as Mike, in 2003 at Sindlesham on the Windsor pedestal. Right Worshipful Brother Mike was initiated into Kendrick Lodge, number 2043 in 1968, becoming Master in 1988. Soon after stepping down as Provincial Grand Master in 2011, he was appointed Inspector General of the District of Berkshire for the Ancient and Accepted Rite, Gros-Qua. But sadly, within a year of his appointment, he died after a short illness. In 2011, Right Worshipful Brother Martin Peters took over and was installed at Sindlesham on the Windsor pedestal. Right Worshipful Brother Martin is still a very active member of the province. Originally an Essex Mason, he became a joining member of Ashley Hill Lodge and went through the chair in 1995. He's left lots of legacies, amongst which are consecrating 4 new lodges, including this one, the Berkshire Lodge of Enlightenment, overseeing the stabilisation of the membership after a long period of decline. And he was also heavily involved in the transfer of the Lodge of Commerce, number 215, from East Lancashire to Berkshire in 2013. Our current Provincial Grand Master, Right Worshipful Brother Anthony Howlett Bolton, was installed at Sindlesham in 2018, which must have caused a bit of a logistical problem because his first outing was to Windsor on the same evening. So the pedestal had to be relocated from Sindlesham to Windsor and be back in situ in time for the meeting that evening. A member of Sandhurst Lodge, Right Worshipful Brother Anthony, was instrumental in getting Solomon up and running, not only within the province, but also nationally. He's also seen the biggest change in information technology, with social media now playing a huge part in getting information out to members. And if you're anything like me, you get several emails a month from UGLE, from the provincial office, and every lodge that you're a member of. And let's remember that it's not that long ago that each one of those would have cost a stamp, an envelope, and some legwork by the secretary. So finally, another quick look at the pedestal. The plaque above the All-Seeing Eye is also from 1890, which states that His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, KG, Most Worshipful Grand Master, obligated his son, His Royal Highness the Duke of Clarence and Avondale, KG, as Provincial Grand Master for Berkshire on this pedestal at Reading, December the 15th, 1890, who then obligated Worshipful Brother J.T. Morland as his Deputy Provincial Grand Master. And the other plaques that you can see around the sides are one for each of the Provincial Grand Masters since, stating his name, the date, and the person who obligated him. I hope you found that of interest, brethren. Most of the information for this talk came from an excellent book called The History of Freemasonry in Berks and Bucks, which is long out of print, but often available on eBay for a few pounds. I'd also like to thank the Right Worshipful Provincial Grand Master, Right Worshipful Brother Anthony, Right Worshipful Brother Martin Peters, and Worshipful Brother Rob Peel, who have all provided me with information and material. And next time I'll be talking about some different objects of interest from around the province. Back to you, Ian.
Thank you, Steve. I think that's a truly fabulous object and a really appropriate object to start our series. And obviously one that makes a visit to a lodge meeting in the Windsor Masonic Hall all the more memorable. I know I'm left with a number of strong impressions. Certainly the royal connections in the early days, and the military connections, which were very strong, and finally the alcoholic connections. John Morland and Michael Hooton made their living from brewing beer and selling wine respectively. Seems like a very convivial mixture, which also illustrates the peak of commitment of service to the province, a commitment to service and leadership that is continued and amply demonstrated today by our own Provincial Grand Master, Right Worshipful Brother Anthony Howlett-Bolton, OBE, which is the perfect introduction to our next item, the first in a series called In the Chair, in which we have a conversation with a prominent Freemason and give you the chance to ask questions. Once again, just use the question and answer link at the bottom of your screen. This evening, the Provincial Grand Master has agreed to talk to us about Masonic learning and development, a subject I know that is very dear to his heart. Welcome, Provincial Grand Master, to this inaugural edition of Enlightenment Live, and many, many thanks for joining us this evening.
Delighted to be with you.
Yeah, I recall the first time that we met was actually in a learning and development event. You were installed in the chair of Santos Lodge in May 2010, and in typical fashion, you wanted to be well prepared for the role. So we met when you attended a course called Preparing for the Master's Chair, which I was helping to run at the time. It was obvious from your participation on that event that you're a very, very keen learner. But what was it that prompted your interest in Masonic learning and development?
Well, I think I've always had a natural curiosity for anything and a real need to understand. I'm one of these sad people that if I buy anything, I read the instructions first before doing anything else. In my profession, I did spend several years as a trainer, as an instructor, and ultimately as a director of training services. So I've always understood the importance of it, and really the importance of getting it right and giving the right message with the right approach.
Okay, so why is a learning and development program important then? Because that implies an awful lot of organization and development to get it going.
Yes, it does. The truth of the matter is, we all say that Freemasonry is individual to everybody, and that's absolutely true. What you get out of it is very personal to where you are and your own experiences. But it's not intuitive, and there's a lot in Freemasonry that needs to be explained. And I've always been amazed at the real detail when you unpack the ritual of and the real. It's beyond my belief how people actually put that together. I mean, it must have been a phenomenal exercise. And T.S. Eliot famously said, "We had the experience, but missed the meaning." And the trouble is, a lot of people learn the ritual, and to varying degrees, some expertly, some not so. And they're really good at delivering it. But what they miss is the real meaning. And without conveying that meaning, you're really just standing on the sidelines. You're not engaging and not a full player. So if you look at the third degree, the exhortation, it has a sentence in there saying that we cannot appreciate the connection of our whole system and the relative dependency of several parts. We need to understand how all of that fits together. And so by unpacking it and by explaining the fundamental values, it becomes internalized, and then it can actually start to influence you as an individual, as a Mason, and it helps you grow. And we'll come back at the end, I'm sure, but many of you will have seen the new strategy that's being promoted by you, Jelly, and peers in the new annual report. And that talks about being thoughtful and confident and growing. And you can only grow if you understand.
Yes, okay, I get that. Certainly my own experience suggests that learning ritual without understanding it first is it's hard work. And I can't remember the number of times that it struck me so forcibly that actually it's all in the ritual. All of our teachings in the ritual, combined with perhaps the lectures. And actually sitting and experiencing meetings and ceremonies over and over again, we see different things at different times. And even after 20 odd years as a Freemason, I often hear the words in a different way. And I absolutely support this idea that, you know, getting closer to the ritual is a fundamental part of our membership. How do you see a learning and development program evolving then, both nationally and within the province?
Okay, well, I think the first thing I'd like to say is, you know, it's not for everybody, in that we can take the horse to water, but we can't make them drink. And to try and force learning and development on somebody who really is motivated by something else is not a good way forward. So it's all about that fostering of curiosity and developing understanding. It has to come from within, and obviously a lot of that is down to the experiences that individuals have in their own lodges, with their own personal mentors and those looking after them. But prior to our work with learning and development in London, which was driven from the bottom up, it came from a survey, and it was particularly supported by the Royal Arch, where it was the members who were saying, we need to know more, we need to have some sort of central repository of information. So really, there was, prior to learning and development, while lots of things have been done, and indeed have been done in this province locally, and we heard earlier from Stephen that Digby had created a learning and development or an education committee. Nevertheless, it was all sort of sporadic. It wasn't pulled together. There was no consistency. So what we were trying to do was, and are still trying to do, is to provide something that is consistent. And we heard Ken talk earlier about, we are not about saying this is the definitive answer to something. It's about providing some sort of coherent response. So really, when we started, not only were the water troughs, and I use lots of mixed analogies, you'll forgive me, but the water troughs were not only empty, they didn't exist. And I've just found it incredible that for an organization coming up to 300 years, we just didn't have anything. So that work has been done, and now there are troughs, and now they are full of water, and we are continually replenishing it. And over the couple of years that Solomon has been evolving, I'm thrilled, and it's not down to me. I just conduct the orchestra. It's down to the really committed team that I've got working with me. There's a huge move to interactivity. There's audio-visual stuff. We've developed a new and very successful program of onboarding, which is a modern name, I think, for courses, online courses. But we were quite cautious when we started. And we talked about gamification and badges and all of that sort of thing. And we thought, not quite sure about this. But interestingly, the new Fellowcraft onboarding course, which has now just been run, and actually, while we're running this tonight, the new Master Masons one is running. 763 badges were obtained. People were asking for badges and then saying, well, what does it mean? And so there is an appetite for the younger Mason to take this very much online digital, way of learning, which is an anathema to me. It's not. We just didn't have any of it when I was a trainer, but now it's totally different. And I think one of the exciting things about UGLE learning and development is its willingness to embrace new ideas, new technology, try it, see what it works, and really have something that is acceptable. So those that want it in the traditional paper form can have it, and those that want it through gaming can have it as well. And I think that's quite exciting. Now, with regard to the national program, of course, it really falls into three key elements. The first, which we call Seek and Learn, relates to the individual. And most people, when they talk about Solomon, talk about the nuggets and that sort of thing. And that's what that's aimed at, very much at fostering curiosity. And that's been hugely successful. I think at the moment we're at well over 36,500, something like that, registered users, growing at about 500 users a month. So clearly something right is happening there. The second element, which we called Share and Encourage, was really to develop joint understanding, but something very much for the lodges to use, and use them in classes of instruction or at appropriate times during the lodge meeting. And I'll come back to this, but the danger with that is you are continually competing with the ritual, which I rudely call the 1, 2, 3 waltz. You do your 1, 2, 3s, and then back you're into a New Year cycle. So there's always a competition with that. And so the third element, which has been designed, this is a very good example of, is what is the provincial type event or the special event, where the idea is, and really it was a bit of a light bulb moment for us only about 2 or 3 months ago as a result of the onboarding experience, where I did some sort of mystery shopping. I'm not very good at this, but I just sort of appear and have a listen and then disappear again. And I was really thrilled with the level of engagement, because on this Fellowcraft webinar, they were for all over the world. So it's not, Solomon isn't just, we're not just providing learning and development for the UK, we're providing for all the districts, and indeed a lot of other Grand Lodges elsewhere, although that causes its own problems, but I will maybe talk about that later. But the fact that I was thrilled with the engagement that these guys were having, and when you read Freemasonry Today, you'll see some of the comments that have come out from that onboarding experience, i.e. the one that's just about to come out next month, if not later this month. And people were saying, when the pandemic started, I was really quite concerned that I was being held back. But now I've done this second degree course, I have a real understanding. So there is really an appetite for that. And I think the way forward really is to create an environment in which people who want to learn can learn. So we don't force feed people. We build what I know in learning and development circles are called learning circles. We get a vibrant community that builds a critical mass, and then it becomes self-sustaining. Now, clearly, there'll still be work done in lodges as well, but this is the area that we're focusing on at the moment, and particularly the international dimension.
I can see how it's an ill wind that blows nobody any good, isn't it? And how the pandemic has forced us really into a leap forward in using new technologies.
Yeah.
What would you say are the greatest challenges you faced with the UGLE Learning and Development Program?
Well, the greatest challenges that we started were really trying to not to frighten the horses, if I can put it that way, because clearly, because Freemasonry or learning and development in Freemasonry had been squeezed by the exponential growth after the war, when there was a huge amount of work happening, and learning and development sort of took a back seat. There were clearly several generations of Freemasons who were very competent and very good, but didn't have the depth of understanding and that personal tuition that they'd had. So one of the things that we were worried about, and still are worried about is the cultural resistance, i.e., how do you break through? It's not just about the ritual. It's not just about going through the chair. It's about you as an individual, your growth and your development. So that was one of the challenges. Another one, which I've sort of alluded to, is we needed to be very careful that we didn't embarrass senior Masons across the board, because clearly if you've got younger Masons, asking very difficult questions that more experienced Masons couldn't answer, there was a potential for a kickback. And bearing in mind that we got no traction then, we got no real members, we had to be very careful about coming in there. I mean, fortunately, one of the greatest challenges for me personally was how little I know and how much other people know. But I'm quite relaxed now, because if I don't know the answer, I say, well, have you looked on Solomon? Because I know that it's going to be there. So I do that as chairing the learning and development. But the truth is, it covers up my personal embarrassment.
But there's also this issue about creating safe spaces, which we talked about earlier on. And so nobody feels foolish or embarrassed by not knowing something.
No, that's absolutely right. Fundamental to our approach is you've got to have a safe space to discuss things, much like this sort of meeting, where you've got to be able to debate, you've got to be able to speculate, you've got to be able to share knowledge without reservation, you've got to be able to ask questions without reservation. There are no stupid questions, there are stupid answers, but there are no stupid questions. And what you think you don't know, most other people don't know either. And actually that was another of our challenges, was how to handle the esoteric elite, which I'm going to rudely call is something of a Masonic snobbery in some cases, because, don't you know that? But what we have really aimed to do with learning and development through Solomon is have an approach that the ordinary man who is interested can find the answer to. Clearly, if people want to go off into higher levels and all the rest of it, lots of avenues, and we'll help them with that. But we are not here to provide the esoteric answers. We're here to provide practical interpretation and help there. Yeah.
And you mentioned just a moment ago the new UGLE strategy, and my guess is that this learning and development initiative and thrust is going to be a key part of that. How does that fit?
Absolutely, and it was mentioned by the Deputy Grand Master at the Programme Masters business meeting. I mean, clearly learning and development has got a lot to do with engaging and retaining members and ensuring that they're interested. But what we are very clear, the new strategy encourages us to be tolerant, it encourages us to be respectful and to fulfill our civic responsibilities. It wants us to be more thoughtful and confident people, and to inspire others. Now, for that to happen, there has really got to be a fundamental internalized understanding of what Freemasonry stands for and the way it's evolved. And this won't happen with a sprinkling of magic dust, but needs to be learned, developed and nurtured. Now, clearly, between now and September, when there's a new marketing campaign coming out, the UGLA are working hard on a membership proposition. Because the question I always ask, and you and I have debated a million times, is what does it mean to be a Freemason? And whilst it means something different, as I said right at the outset, for every individual, there are some common issues that are really, really important and go across the board, which you haven't got. And I'm not just talking about the things you have to tick in the box on the Form P application form. Do I believe in this, that, and the other? But it is about respect for each other and that tolerance. And I think what we are doing really helps with that. I've got a very small team working with me, and I have to say I'm immensely proud of them, and I'm immensely proud of what we've achieved, because our committee isn't like a traditional Masonic committee. There are no airs and graces. We get in there, they're professionals, and we sort it out, and we have the difficult conversations. But again, we need to be thoughtful and respectful for views, because there are very, dynamic and different views on occasions, and we have to work their way through. So, as I say, my job is not to be, the cleverest man, because I'm certainly not. I'm not the sharpest knife in the box, but I am a relatively good conductor of an orchestra.
Well done. Well, Provincial Grand Master, look, thank you for sharing with us your thoughts about what is clearly a key part of our strategy to encourage a closer and deeper engagement of our members, and the development of an organisation that will appeal to many thoughtful new members in the years ahead. Brethren, having heard the Provincial Grand Master's thoughts and our previous 2 items, we now move on to our question and answer session. If you've already written a question using the Q&A facility, we'll try and answer that. And if another question strikes you as we go, I believe there's also a reactions button on the bottom of the screen. You can raise your hand and we'll try and get to you. And this is all a bit new to me, so I'm not quite sure what happens next. I'm relying on my on the technical backup here to move us on to questions and answers.
Ian, I think it's me coming in to put forward any questions.
Thank you, Ian.
So from the panelists, you've got 2 Ians who are going to now obviously go through questions with you. I think we're starting off with a question for the Right Worshipful Provincial Grand Master. You mentioned that Freemasonry is a personal journey when you were talking. What, or was it someone who encouraged you to become a Freemason, and how long did it take you to decide to join the order?
Well, I joined a long time ago, and in those days, there was no invitation as such. You couldn't turn around and say, I want to become a Freemason, or people didn't, and if they did, I certainly didn't know about it. So I was approached at work by one of my colleagues who said it might be interesting, and we would quite like you to join us. And it was as simple as that. And I thought it over. I knew that Freemasonry was stood for everything that was good about society, and I said yes, I'd like to join. And it was a couple of years then before I heard anything more. And then in I came, and as they say, the rest is history.
Okay, thank you very much. Question to Ken. It says that you and the Provincial Grand Master have suggested lots of change with Solomon. This is quite an interesting point. Is there any way that we could use Solomon from a lodge or from a provisional perspective, in that we could tailor our own, such as our own microsite, in helping things like Lodge of Instruction, that sort of stuff?
I don't see any problem with that. I mean, we state fairly categorically on Solomon, on every item on Solomon, that there's copyright on it, but the copyright is owned by UGLE, and therefore everyone's a member of UGLE, and so they do have the right to make use of that in any way they want, really, as long as they acknowledge it comes from Solomon and they don't change it significantly. That copyright, we often get asked about that copyright notice, and it's there to prevent anyone downloading everything and putting it onto their site without reference to us, and also to prevent any kind of commercial use of the material that's there.
Okay, thank you, Ken. We've got a question in from Steve Croston, one of the attendees. Is there a way of newer brethren being aware of the running fellowcraft courses other than lodge members pointing them towards it? I'm assuming that's the fellowcraft onboarding that's been discussed.
Can I answer that, Ian?
Yeah.
The fellowcraft onboarding has so far we've run it by taking cohorts from within Solomon itself. As we move forward, what we're going to be looking to do is to target those newly passed fellowcraft. If we say, let's just stick with the second degree onboarding for the moment. So we will identify those newly passed fellowcrafts, and they will be sent an invitation to join to enrol on Solomon and join in the onboarding course. I was actually talking to Craig Johnson, who's behind the onboarding courses, this morning about ways in which we might develop this and make sure that we are attracting individuals onto it.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Question for Steve. Why was the pedestal from the Windsor Centre chosen and continues to be used for the installation of the Provincial Grand Master?
It's a really good question, and I must profess that I'm not an expert on the pedestal. I've done a bit of research and reading on it. I think because it was, difficult. I certainly know because of its association with the royal family in the early days. I think that's the reason that it was chosen subsequently, certainly. Why it was chosen for the first one, I don't really know, I'll be honest, but I'll look into that and see if I can find out.
Yeah, I think obviously we've said questions, we can get those out with other items when we send a video out to attendees. So I'm sure if other questions come in, we can do the same with that one. So thanks for that, Steve.
Okay.
It's really interesting in terms of how that piece of furniture has become so intrinsic to what we do for the Provincial Grand Master and installing it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, last question for you, Ian. If I was interested in joining the Berkshire Lodge of Enlightenment, as you said, you don't perform regular ceremonies. Are there any restrictions or criteria for joining?
Yes, there are. We expect that the members of the lodge will be active in supporting learning in some way or another. So most of our members have either got connections with education or with training, or have experience in consulting or facilitation of some kind. So there is a sort of qualification. That's our focus. That's our interest group, and we are an instrument of the province. So we expect people to be able to contribute to delivering, against our aims and objectives. So I will be I'm only the current master, but I would be expecting all of the members of the Lodge of Enlightenment to be willing and able to step into one of this type of short presentations, for example. And that's my way of making that invitation to all of those brethren who haven't yet done so.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I've got a question coming from one of our attendees, Tanny Martins. I've been on Solomon a few times, but couldn't quite figure out what would be of most value to me as a young Mason. Any advice? I just wondered, could I take that? Because obviously I was involved with the Berkshire Learning and Development and the Mentors webinar a couple of weeks ago. And I think one of the things we were stressing when we talked about Solomon was how mentors and personal mentees should engage with newer brethren and softly take them through the process of how Solomon can be used to support their own personal journey. So I'd sort of recommend to Tanny, have a chat with your lodge mentor. Hopefully they've allotted you a personal mentor and you could talk through with them, but obviously contact us if you want any support. We're happy to do that through Berkshire Lodge of Enlightenment or through the Berkshire Learning and Development Committee. Okay, I think we'll probably take this as the last question again from one of our attendees. Darren Evans, how does the Lodge of Enlightenment choose which lodges it visits, or do we invite you? One for you, Ian.
Well, no, it's not quite that way, Darren. We have two so-called emergency meetings, which are indeed additional meetings, which we can move to other Masonic centres other than Sindlesham. So we don't crash into a lodge meeting at the centre. We come and run one of our meetings, and those two additional meetings are actually quite flexible. We have two formal meetings which are fixed by our bylaws in June and in December, and the other two meetings sort of float in March and September. We've actually been to the Windsor Centre, we've been to Wantage, and to Wallingford. So we're open to invitations to centres, but we don't necessarily interfere with the normal meeting frequency of ordinary lodges. I hope that clarifies it.
Okay, brethren, I think we'll sort of wind that up as the Q&A session, because I know our Worshipful Master has got something special. He's been very interested in Alan Turing becoming on the back of the £50 notes, and as his usual membership of MI5 is coming to an end, he's bringing his own conundrum. So over to you, Worshipful Master.
Well, look, just before we close, I will introduce the Master's conundrum. Could we have that slide up, please, John? We're gonna have a conundrum in each edition of Enlightenment Live, and the questions will all be constructed to encourage just a little research and thought to find the answer. And when you have the answer, you write it in an email and send it to the secretary at that address that's on the screen at the moment, and put the Master's conundrum in the subject line. And the closing date for this conundrum is the 30th of May. And we will draw at random out of a digital hat the first correct answer on the 1st of June. And the winner of this contest will win Masonic book or books up to a value of £25. So I'm hoping that prize, being quite worthwhile, will encourage you to dig in and to answer the question, and very good luck with it. And finally, brethren, we hope that you've enjoyed this evening and the features that we've been able to put together. We've heard how Solomon's becoming more interactive and directional with the use of characters such as Fred and Charlie. And we'll have a follow-up feature in our next edition on the 5th of July, when we'll be actually hosting a live conversation between a real senior and a real junior Mason, exploring the concept of speculation as it applies to us as Masons. And it really was intriguing to hear about some of the history and personalities of previous Berkshire PGMs, and to see that fabulous pedestal, which has been an intrinsic feature of their installations. As a lodge that has education at its heart, it was really interesting to hear the views of our own Provincial Grand Master on the central role of learning in development, and that development of us all as men and as Masons. You're going to receive a request for your comments on this edition, a bit of feedback. Please take 5 minutes or so to let us know, and you'll also receive an invitation to the next edition in July, and details on where you can go for more information on the topics we've covered this evening. Finally then, thanks to the Provincial Grand Master, to Ken Wotton and to Steve Ricks for their contribution, and to the others in the editorial and the support group, especially Ian Freeth and John McGregor, who've made this possible this evening. We hope that you've enjoyed the first edition, and we hope that you'll be joining us again for more Enlightenment Live in July. Good night, brethren.